Let me start with Mr. Ahmed. And I said that this was to investigate this effectiveness of South Africa's public participation and accountability. If you were to sum up the feelings of the NGOs, and there were a lot of them, the civil society organizations, about 14 of them participating in this conference, and also a number of very prominent South Africans who also participated in this conference. What is the view?
I think, Kolani, the first thing to say is that there was an acknowledgement that there was some at least our parliamentarians from national parliament and the provincial legislatures made an effort to come and to discuss these things. So that was welcome. But I think the overall feeling by everyone was that since 1999, our parliament has become totally dysfunctional and has become dysfunctional in what I would say at least three areas. Mm-hmm. The first is legislation. And if you look at it from the Medicines and Related Substances Act right through to the Sexual Offences Act, it seems that Parliament, and this would include the opposition, has failed to properly scrutinise legislation for loopholes which either the very powerful or even criminals could have abused. And that's a very serious danger. The second area was accountability, where ministers and directors general and a range of people are not held, officials are not held accountable. So, for instance, the dangers we see in terms of deep instability in our country today arises from the fact that no one, including me, know who our constituency MP is. No one knows how Parliament, and by this I don't mean the NGOs, the civil society, the religious leaders and so on. By this I don't mean that. Most ordinary citizens and people living in South Africa do not know how Parliament or any legislature work, and sometimes not even definitely how municipal councils work. Mm-hmm. So accountability. The other area is financial oversight. Mm-hmm. Almost every major service delivery and other department, whether it's justice or SAPS or education, housing, human settlements and so on, everyone has had a qualified audit, including health, for more than 15 years. But neither the executive nor Parliament has held one person accountable for misspending. One department, one DG, no one has been held accountable in terms of the Public Finance Management Act. And that has led to a culture where our parliament, our bureaucracy believes that it can get away with doing the least. And sometimes, and I'm not saying every public servant is like that, but certainly a significant number are involved in looting our state. And the last thing I would say is, because there's not this oversight, you have a situation, you imagine the constituency MPs in Limpopo or in Western Cape were functioning. In the Western Cape, since August 2010, there have been stockouts of medicines, chronic medicines. I'm not talking about antiretrovirals, I'm talking about heart medicines, which lead to people's deaths, asthma medicines, diabetes, cancer, and so on. There have been stockouts until at least July this year. And the Premier, neither the Premier nor the Western Cape Legislature has held Tiens Botha, the Minister in Health, accountable for those shortcomings.
All right.
Similarly with Limpopo.
Mm-hmm. I'll come back to you because I need to find out whether are these just sentiments, or is there a scientific way within which we can then say these are the standards, and if we look at the performance of our parliament, then we can say they are below the standard. So we'll talk about that in a minute. But let me go to Sizan Ngubane again and find out whether she agrees with you, and if she does, why is 1999 a significant year here? Because Zaki is starting off with the 1999. He says since 1999 there's been this dysfunction. Sizan?
Yeah, I do agree with Ahmed. As the rural women's movement, we are looking at three issues, which is the accessibility, the affordability, the time, and the complexity of the process. If we're talking about accessibility, I will make an example of the rural women's movement. The movement is made up of 50,000 women and like 50% of them did not have an opportunity to get formal education. And some of us cannot read and write. And when these pieces of legislations are presented to us, they are presented in a foreign language. None of them are presented to us in our local languages. And if we're talking about the affordability of the process, it's an expensive process. One has to hire a lawyer in order to be able to understand how parliament functions and even how local government functions. One has to have assistance of a legal expert. And if we talk about the time, I will make an example of the process around the Traditional Courts Bill. When we were informed by Parliament that there will be public education and public hearings in our communities, we were only given 6 weeks to prepare for the public hearings. And at the public hearings, there was a lot of intimidation from the chiefs who wouldn't even allow us to speak, and we were shouted down. So it was not easy for us.
So in other words, you say the process does not protect women?
It doesn't protect women at all. And if one talks about time, it also reminds me about the process in 2003, where we challenged the government about the constitutionality of the Communal Land Rights Act of 2004. That process was an expensive process. We had to send like a group of between 10 and 12 women to Parliament in Cape Town to present our submissions, and to fly 12 people from KwaZulu-Natal to Cape Town and accommodation was an expensive process for RWM. And we won the battle against the government, because in May 10, 2010, the Constitutional Court declared the Communal Land Rights Act as unconstitutional. But up till today, we don't know what is going to happen about the Communal Land Rights Act, whether they are going to draft another Communal Land Rights Act or what. The government manages the time and manages what will happen, when and how.
All right, but let me bring in the Bishop. Bishop Kasiboto, I suppose the broad question is whether or not some of the problems that have already been raised are by design or by default. Do you think that it's deliberate that people are left out, or is it because of the difficulties associated perhaps with trying to get everybody on board?
Thank you. I think it is the nature of things that when you start off, you may not be firing on all cylinders. I think the point needs to be made that from the part of religion, for instance, since 1994, there's a sense in which we probably removed our foot a little from the pedal. And it's only now that we're garnering our efforts to be alongside the rest of civil society and trying to determine a useful future for the rest of society.
That's interesting because interesting because you're suggesting that civil society itself is to blame for some of the things that have happened. That people have not been assertive enough.
That point came out very strongly. That rather than pointing a finger, we actually need to look at ourselves. How broadly consultative are we as structures of civil society? How much do we do that? And an undertaking is made to do something serious about that. But the other point I wanted to make is that it is positive, the willingness of representatives of legislatures, both provincial and national, to be in consultation and bare their breast and confess to shortcomings. And there is a willingness on the part of government as well as civil society, as I saw, to approach one another and get to a resolution of problems that we might be having.
All right, I'll come back. And by the way, the lines are open. If you have a view on this, you can give me a call on 0891 104 208, 0891 104 208, 34701, the SMS line here, 34701, emails at gwalax@sabc.co.za, gwalax@sabc.co.za. Mr. Ahmed, let me come back to you. Two questions for you. The one I asked a little earlier on about the standards, whether they're just sentiments or are there standards that should be maintained here. But secondly, perhaps just as a follow-up, I really would like to know why this 1999 is important. You started off there.
Yeah. Kolani, just first the standards, because that's actually quite easy. Parliament, in I think it was 2003, asked former MP Pregs Governor to head Parliament's own commission into undertaking how Parliament works, whether it's been effective and so on. And what that commission found was whether it's participation, affordability, as Mankubani mentioned, whether it was how Parliament drew up legislation, any range of things were a problem. So it went through systematically in terms of the Constitution, what Parliament's and legislation, what the Parliament's duties are, and how it needs to function. And it saw very clearly that there were shortcomings. Now, Parliament hasn't implemented any most of the recommendations of that committee. And there are benchmarks against internationally which we could look at functioning legislatures. What we must understand is that it's not only our Parliament that is such a huge problem. If you look at the United States Senate and House, they are totally beholden to huge money. The Van Zyl-Slabbert Commission many years ago made a recommendation that we should adopt a mixed parliamentary system, and Parliament tabled that report but has never discussed it. What that report wanted was that we should, at one level, elect our MPs directly on constituency basis, and then about 2/3 of MPs should come on proportional representation so that we ensure that minority groups and minority parties are represented in Parliament.